and Ambassador Linda Jewell, we would love to welcome you here to our second Lunch and Learn session, sponsored by the PDC, on social media do's and don'ts. I'm going to pass this off to Ambassador Jewell to give you a few words of welcome from the PDC.
Actually, I'll make this super fast. I know there are a couple of you, at least, who have not been to one of these before. So I'll just say that the Public Diplomacy Council sponsors these sessions as a way for public diplomacy officers to come together to share similar problems, strategies for fixing them, best practices, and sort of to create a little bit of a community within the public diplomacy cone, as it were, since it's something a lot of us had when we started out when we were in USIA, and you guys don't have it as much as we did. So we feel like that it's useful to pick subjects, and there's been a survey done about the subjects that you're interested in. So we'll just try to keep doing these, I don't know, 3 or 4 times a year to get everybody together. And so we're always interested in feedback and topics that you'd like to have covered in one of these. And feel free to, speak to each other, get network. That's one of the benefits of having these kinds of things. So thank you all for coming today. And I think it's going to be, for me, a really interesting session. It's not something that I did so much when I was in the service. So thanks for coming.
Thank you, Ambassador Jewell. Now we're going to get right into it. Our first speaker is Caitlin Turk. She's a PD Cone Foreign Service Officer, currently serving as the Global Digital Engagement Advisor in Consular Affairs. Caitlin?
Thanks. Can I move around too?
You can. If you like, I can handle this for you.
Oh,
To forward your
yeah,
slides.
if you don't mind. Also, my position is open, so if anybody, good. So, I'm Caitlin. Thanks for coming today. So I wrote actually engaging because I feel like I've been to so many social media talks where it's like, oh, let's make like engaging social media posts, and they're always talking about like using the right visuals, the right words, so it's engaging. And I'm like, but that's only one way. You're just broadcasting a beautiful or cool worded thing, and then you just leave it out there. And I feel like I see this a lot where posts just put something out there and then never check back in to see like what people are saying and then comment on it or like it. And if you just think about your personal social media pages, like I feel a lot of pressure if I like put a post and then people comment and I haven't like liked their comment or like replied to their comment because you can't like emoji sad their comment. So I'm like, oh, I better say like I disagree too. So people expect that same kind of interaction. So I'm in the Bureau of Consular Affairs right now, and I am one of the people that manages our social media platforms. And so we have @TravelGov on Twitter. And one thing that's really unique about that is we talk to people all day long. Yeah, it's also, we're kind of customer service too, because people have technical questions they're asking us, but that's similar for overseas, where people are also trying to get specific questions answered. And we respond to people all the time, but we also we talk to them even if they're not talking to us, because on Twitter you can mention us, but sometimes they're just mentioning us maybe to say like we suck or something. They're not saying like, hey you, they're just like, oh, @TravelGov ruined my passport, or @TravelGov did this. And we could just leave that there, but we always chime in, because we have our, Hootsuite tools, and we see who's talking about us, and we respond. If they say something we like, we share it. We're very open with that. We're not nervous about who are these people we're sharing. If it like helps us, if it's a good comment, or they're sharing something that is our point, we just go ahead and share it. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, nice and green. So also on Facebook, it's the same thing where we'll go and pretty much we try to respond to every realistic comment. Sometimes it's just a like people say thanks, thanks for saying thanks. But maybe it's answering a question. On our Facebook page, there's a lot more like random stuff that we don't answer because people like put their telephone numbers for some reason. So like you see our comment stream, and it's just like all these numbers. Okay, so we don't respond to that. But anything that's legitimate and that's not a troll, that's not something weird, we actually are responding and going in there. We look in our reviews section on Facebook and see who people are reviewing us, only because sometimes people do that because you can't just post to our page, right? Just like all other pages. You have to post on a post or you can write a review. So I go into the reviews to see what people are saying and actually try to get feedback. And if they have something serious, we try to give them another outlet that they can reach out to us. Like, oh, hey, this sounds like a difficult case you were dealing with. Why don't you email us? Sometimes people also tell us things are wrong, or they're like, why is your website this way? Or why don't you have this listed? And we're like, oh, yeah, let's go fix that. And then we go back and tell them, thank you for telling us, like, we fixed this because of you. And so this is kind of like the daily back and forth. And just really briefly, like, this helps us build influencers, which I think we're also like trying to figure out sometimes, like, how do we get other people to say our stuff? Well, we go to them, like, especially on Twitter, we'll just go hop into conversations. It's all happening in the open space. So I think it's like a networking party or something talking, and you're like, about that topic. So we'll see chats that are going on and just pop into them, like do searches for things related to us, and all of a sudden there might be an LGBT travel session going on, and we're just like, oh, actually, there's a resource for that, or here's the answer to that, even though we weren't a host of that chat or something, and that builds our credibility in these spaces, and it starts making us familiar to many of these big influencers who have a lot of followers, so that they know that we're a resource and they can come to us. So you can go to the next slide. And I do want to say that this really works. So these are just two different articles. One time we helped someone, we didn't know who, we don't like check on people before we talk to them, and it turns out that the person we were assisting and chatting with on Twitter was actually a Condé Nast travel writer. So then she wrote this whole article unsolicited saying TravelGov is the best thing. I mean, it's like a voice in the government, someone you can actually talk to. And I think that's what social media can be. I mean, even on our account, you can see on our Twitter description, right now it says on duty, Caitlin and Lori. So Lori's not here, my colleague, but well, we're working on social media, so people can actually just say, Caitlin, what's up? Lori, what's up? And so people feel like there's someone there who's actually behind this government entity. And so that was really great publicity for us. Like, hey, there's someone real in the government that wants to talk to you. And then there was also this survey done of all different industries, government, corporate entities, and they rated customer service. They surveyed over like 100,000 Americans, and basically the federal government is terrible, and we're terrible in customer service. But they singled out in the article the Bureau of Consular Affairs, and they said as one of the main reasons that we have this high rating, despite the rest of the government having low ratings, is because of our social media interaction. In fact, we have bi-weekly Twitter chats. We're really out there saying, like, we're available. What are your questions? We're here to help you. And last slide. And then that helps us. This is just stats from the attempted Turkey coup. In 3 days, we had 9.1 million views on our tweets. And so people, part of that is that we sent out tweets that are just information, messages, but we also talked to people. We answered over 100 questions, most of them that first Friday night, all in the middle of the crisis. And now Consular Affairs thinks that's important. So even if I don't know the answer to something, I can write the task force and say, someone on Twitter is asking this. And someone high level, sometimes even a DAS, will answer me. And so that's been a big change even in the past year, where we have people saying, like, oh, we can answer a Twitter question. That's as important as something else we're doing, which has been a big shift, and it's not obviously like throughout the department, so we all have to work on that. But this idea that this is a really important communication platform, so if people are talking to us, those people deserve feedback, answers, responses, because this is all happening in the public sphere, so it's not like a phone call, it's not like an individual chat, like your conversation can be viewed by thousands of people, so that can really help promote our messages. So basically we work in crisis and regular, and it just helps this idea that both are contributing to the other. Our normal collaboration with the public, that we're chatting with them, then assists us in a crisis because people know they can come to us, and vice versa. And I know it is hard on an embassy account, for instance, to do this kind of back and forth, but it is worth it to get that clearance at post if the person who's normally managing social media is not allowed to, maybe by their level or whatever, to just freely answer people. That has to be worked out. I think the answer can't just stop there, like, no, we don't do that. And unfortunately, I've heard, even through higher levels here, just say like, oh, well, we need to be careful with that. Well, like, why are we on social media? Honestly, like, social media is social. So if we think it's just a glorified website where we can put out messages in no particular order with no particular type of branding, and that's going to work, and we don't have to talk to people, it's not realistic. So people can want that, but there's going to be no results. So it is worth it that if you're running a social media account, that you figure out how do you get that kind of like clearance ahead of time. I would say for our account, we pretty much don't run anything by anyone. Sometimes for a campaign we do, like we say like, oh, we have this huge campaign coming up, here are 50 tweets we have planned, and then a few people might see them. But for the most part, we just answer someone and we do it, and it's pretty good so far. So I do encourage you, just something to think about in the social media realm of just that really important piece of talking back and forth with people, and how that can really add a personal element to your account, even though it doesn't have a name on it, and also build up your influencer network.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. Does anyone have any questions for Caitlin?
You said you... No, actually, they're not. Because just for everyone's awareness, we have a video camera, so you are on candid camera essentially, and if you don't speak into the microphone, you won't get picked up at all.
Okay. You said you pop into conversations happening on your issues in venues outside the U.S. government. How do you find them? How do you decide which ones are worth it?
Yeah, so we will set up like different search terms. Right now, for instance, we're exploring into Reddit, and so Reddit is kind of like that. You have all these different chat rooms that are happening, and so we'll actually just look up certain things like passport, and there's like travel subreddits, and we'll just look for keywords, certain travel terms, and keep an eye on it. I mean, after a while, we start to know some of the big industries like travel people who have discussions, like some of the biggest travel bloggers or travel writers have monthly chats, and we know that. We figured it out just by the people we follow, so being some of these travel bloggers. So I mean, in another account, it might be certain policy people, it might be certain student groups or universities, whatever it means for your accounts. But yeah, I mean, a lot of searches, honestly, we've been aided by the fact that we do have a new colleague in our section that can focus on that. I mean, that's not her primary role, but before, we only had 2 people in digital engagement in consular affairs. Now we're 3 people that can work on it. So even with that additional role, nobody is sitting in front of the computer full time. That is one of her tasks, where she's literally like looking for these conversations with the ultimate idea that it will benefit us in the end to do that initial ground research.
I would add that for tools, like technical tools, just to do those searches, Hootsuite is good, as well as using just Twitter lists, which is native onto the platform, can really help you to find specific topics that are being discussed.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering, just thinking about how this would work at Post for an IO or an AIO, basically, and given kind of competing time demands, traditional media, electronic media, etc. What would you say between the 2 of you or 3 of you, like how many, on average, like how many hours does one person spend a week, like doing this kind of person-to-person personal engagement on these platforms?
At this point, now that we're 3 people, I don't really do it at all, because my whole focus is something different. My passion is social media in a crisis. Talk about that after if you're interested. But I have a colleague who teleworks from California, and it's probably, I would say like 2 hours of her day total that she would be both monitoring and answering questions. And for my other colleague, I would probably also say about 2 hours a day where she's searching for these topics or looking for things, or she'll look at trending hashtags and be like, oh, do we have anything to say versus like 5 worst words or whatever stupid hashtag is going on, to see if we can tie that into one of our policy things. It's honestly not that much. I think the fear is that it would be a lot. Definitely we had to talk down some people in our section, different like directorates like passports, we're like, we're gonna get so many questions. We get on average 1 to 15 questions a day outside of a chat. And honestly, most things people ask are really like, let me Google that for you questions. So we just Google that for them. In terms of policy stuff, at posts, like that does take a little bit more time to draft a response, but I think it should be part of your strategy that if you're going to be putting out an important speech to suspect, or be putting out an important point to expect that people are going to come back. For instance, I saw a post put out a video that clearly they'd worked hard in making. They dropped it. It did not get a good review, and all of a sudden you have 150 people from the country being like, this video is wrong, this is this, and they never popped back in. But obviously they had the points, they made the video, they could have engaged in some sort of discussion because they'd already thought about the topic ahead of time, but no one did, so it was just left out there.
I saw that somebody back here had a question. Yeah? We actually, just in the interest of moving on, because we do have 3 other presenters today, and again, apologies for the late start, we're going to have one more question.
I was just wondering if, besides travel.state.gov, if you've seen any embassies that are doing this well that we could look to for an example?
I'll be talking in a moment about social media analytics, but our team is the digital support and training team within IIP, and we help to train PAOs, IOs, local staff on how to develop a social media strategy and how to work well with social media. There are quite a few embassies that are doing it well. A lot of WHA, Honduras's ambassadors doing it really well. Uganda's Facebook page. I've got a number of people that I could give you, just not off the top of my head. So I'd be happy if you want to reach out afterward to share lists, and also with any of you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jody Suria. I'm a graphic designer for CAP. I'll step aside, and I will make this brief so that we can allow for additional questions at the end.
Why is this not? Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so the first slide that you see here is just a screenshot of our travel gov accounts for Facebook and Twitter. And you'll see that some of the elements here are repeated so that there's, some type of like brand consistency, so that when, the public sees our sites, they know that, they're both related. Here are some graphics that we developed for a passport Q&A. We do a bi-weekly session on TravelGov on Twitter. So just some of the questions that we get from the Twitter chat that we have are, questions about, getting a passport, visa pages, that kind of thing. So we converted it into graphics that we could tweet out, just to kind of eliminate like some of the questions that we were constantly getting. Instead of, just tweeting it out, we incorporated it into a graphic. And these are expert traveler tips that are going on Twitter. They're actually trending right now. So we decided to incorporate, we being myself and Christy Harrison, who's our other graphic designer, incorporating like different elements that you might see on a passport. You'll see like the passport stamps. You can incorporate like little icons, like you see the plane, you see the landing strip. Again, you also see the Department of State seal, which you will see on all of our graphics to, again, tie in that it's coming from our TravelGov account. This is for the Students Abroad campaign. This kind of gives it more of a human element by seeing, someone that you can kind of relate to. So these are just, different students traveling the world. And this is our diversity visa campaign that was on Facebook. Again, just, a Q&A session. Again, different questions about the DV lottery. And then that's it. So, oh, sorry. So you just kind of want to think about, creating something that's eye-catching, that will, grab someone's attention pretty quickly, because they may only see it for a few moments. So you just want to get, your point across very quickly, but do it in an eye-catching way.
That's great, Jody. Could you elaborate a little further as to what kind of tips would you give someone who had to, say, go on Paint or even Canva.com to create their own graphics? As a graphic artist, what are some easy tips that a person can use to kind of make their graphics stand out a little bit more?
I wouldn't suggest Paint. That's just me. But actually, Publisher, I know a lot of posts do have Publisher. There are a few limitations to the software, but I would definitely say Publisher may be the way to go. I know that you can crop certain things that you're creating in Publisher. I personally use a lot of like Photoshop. I know some posts do have access to it. I know not all do, but I would definitely maybe rely more, I guess, on Publisher for that type of thing.
Just for everybody's, I'm sorry, I highly recommend, you know, for those of us who are at posts, it's really difficult to find time because this is time-consuming stuff, especially if you don't know what you're doing, like me. I highly recommend the Virtual Student Foreign Service Program. We put in proposals at my last post in Lahore, and we got some really great students who created these graphics for us. That's like free labor that's really easy to use, and you can mentor some students who are really interested in the foreign service. I highly recommend it because, to be honest, and those of you who've ever been a PAO at Post, you know you're not going to have time to make this stuff. And it's really great, and I totally agree. It's good to share on your pages, but you need some expertise really in that area, and some students are really great at that. Anyway, just a tip.
And also we do have the CA Outreach Hub, which has a lot of like content as well as some imagery as well and some templates that Post could potentially use. So that may also be another source that you all can think about.
Does anyone have any other questions?
Just how, you mentioned branding, but how would you actually do that? Like, what does that look like for a post, like who might be putting up a variety of different things in the year, maybe from different sections, like is it like through colors or, you know, certain, I don't know, like how do you like make things look like they're from the same place?
Well, again, you saw that like with the graphics that were on the presentation, like they all incorporated the seal. I mean, that's one key way of, you know, tying in your messages so that they're all, you know, cohesive. As well as, you know, you might want to think about using a specific color palette for Twitter or for Facebook. You may want to, you know, use blues or greens or, you know, what have you, depending on, I guess, more or less the campaign and depending on the audience as well.
And I'm just going to add on to what everyone says. The Social Media Hub is another resource that you can use if you work with social media, and we do have an article on free image editing tools that are available to use on OpenNet and for free. I believe the article is called Image Editors or something like that, but it's socialmedia.state.gov. And we also have another article about where you can find resources around the department for images to use and copyright-free images when you're building the images yourself. And it has to be from OpenNet. Yeah, socialmedia.state.gov is only available on OpenNet.
Thanks so much, Jody. Rebecca?
I hope nobody passes out. Okay, so my name is Rebecca Ernest. I am going blind. I am on the digital support and training team in IIP. And our team does quite a few things. We work on training for the field. We work on training, not so much in DC, but if we can fit you in, we can. We run the Social Media Hub, and we also run an inbox for social media help questions, which is IIPSMS@state.gov. And that's myself, my colleague Maria's on there, and we have 4 other teammates who can help to answer any questions on social media, and I can share any information with you after this presentation as well. So it's just not... So what I was asked to talk to you about today was social media, and I think that there's kind of a large gap in just social media analytics and what you need to know, what you need to focus on. For a long time, the State Department has focused on sheer numbers, which makes me cry sometimes. I think Caitlin also alluded to that with her focus on engagement. I would like to see the department and embassies and anyone running a social media account sort of move away from looking at your followers, specifically as a number. Please don't report that you have 200,000 followers, because that in and of itself doesn't say anything. It doesn't tell you who your audience is. And say you're running a Facebook page in Karachi, the biggest one, right? If half of their fans are not the people that they're trying to talk to, then that number in and of itself, again, doesn't matter. You want to look at where your fans are coming from, and you want to look at what they are looking to get from you. So that's just a big asterisk on this whole thing. In my presentation, which I'll just look at, and then I can share with you guys afterward as well, because I have some links that will help. I wanted to just talk about Facebook Insights really quickly, Twitter Insights, and sort of the things that you should look at. I have a lot of definitions, because I think that some people don't necessarily know what analytics terms mean necessarily, because they are hard and they switch around a lot. So does anyone know what reach means in Facebook Analytics? We got a hand. Oh, where's the other microphone? Sorry, I'm a trainer, so I'm a little more interactive. Okay.
In Facebook?
Yes, Facebook. What does reach mean in Facebook Insights?
So reach means like who actually sees what you put out.
Exactly. So reach means the number, because it is a number, it's the number of people who had the opportunity to see the content that you publish. And those people aren't necessarily your fans. They're not necessarily the ones who like the page. And it's a really important number to gauge, because it can vary based on whether the content is good, whether the content is pertinent to your audience, and whether you paid to have it promoted or not. So, we also have engagements. You got an answer for engagements? Since you got my
engagement means when somebody likes or comments or somehow does something with your post.
Yes. Likes, comments, and shares. Those are the three standard for engagements. Shares are like the most valuable aspect of a social media engagement, because that is someone taking your content, saying it is valuable to me, giving it credibility, and then sharing it with their audience. So we all want to aim for that gold standard of shares. Is this getting too in the weeds? You guys okay? Okay. And then we've also got the engagement rate, which is it is one of the best ways to sort of rate the healthiness of your page and of your audience interacting with your page. And it's simply the reach divided, the total number of engagements divided by the reach. And you can do that for each post, or you can do it for your page overall over a certain time period. I promise I have this all written down for you to take with you. And then there are also, I really wish you could see this, but you can't. There are also certain aspects within Facebook Insights that can tell you what type of posts work for your audience. Anecdotally, I think most of us, if you have social media background, think that images are just always going to do well, right? Like photos are what's going to do well. But that depends, again, on your audience. So knowing who your audience is very important. When I was in the DRC, Congo, in March, we just went back into their Facebook Insights, looked at the type of posts that work best for them, and I almost passed out because it was text, just sheer text. And not just text, but like press briefings, written out and pasted in full on their Facebook page, which I would not recommend to anyone who is running a Facebook page here or in most places, but it's because of the audience. They were looking for information, and the US Embassy was the only one providing them with that information. So they would read through the entire text and engage with it and ask questions. And then the embassy would do a good job of engaging with them and responding back. As far as Twitter analytics go, you also have impressions, which isn't quite as helpful as reach because it can count a person more than one time, whereas reach is unique views. Impressions is just like I, as a person, could see something 3 times and it would count me 3 times. But it is comparable to reach And then you've got engagements as well, and then the engagement rate, which again is the number of engagements divided by impressions. All right, I think I've talked to you about that. So IIP also has another team called the IIP Analytics team, but they get a lot more in the weeds than I just did, so and they can help you with country, what are they called? Media landscape reports, which can tell you not just about social media, and those are free to find. It's in the presentation. They build crowd tangle dashboards. If you don't know what that is, it is very helpful in comparing social media pages around the State Department, and they can give you at Post or in your office a more in-depth social media analysis. And then the last thing I've got, my team has worked with the IAP Analytics team to come up with a report template for anyone who wants to use it. It doesn't have to be abroad, where you can take bits and pieces and fill in the template yourself. It's already designed. It's in Word, horrifyingly enough for my designer friends here, but it's very easy to edit and to print out and to share via email. So we've got that also on the Social Media Hub. Yes?
So I'm kind of a Luddite. I'm not very good at social media. And one of my colleagues in my last post, USAID, introduced us all to this idea of Hootsuite, but we didn't have any money to get a subscription to Hootsuite. And I was just wondering, is there a policy now on analytic tools like that? Are they supplied to posts, or is there sort of a best practice to get those kinds of tools?
Absolutely. Another thing that my team does is manage the Hootsuite license situation at the State Department. Currently, we pay for 2 licenses per post. Those are, and we have a deluxe package, so it's $500 per license. Anything over that, currently it's usually users in Pass. CA has purchased 50, I think. Did you bump it up?
Trying, yeah.
Yeah. So there are 50 consular users now who also have licenses, but we can definitely help you with that. I would clarify that Hootsuite isn't necessarily the best analytics tool, but it does help if you're posting regularly. We can help you analytics-wise in other ways. It does have analytics, but sometimes they're a little complicated because they're still changing the tool.
And if I can add on to that, for those of you who are active posters and social media coordinators right now, I'm sure you've noticed that Hootsuite has actually lost a lot of their usability ever since Twitter has changed their the way they put content online. Now you can put on photos without costing any characters, and in addition to that, you can tag up to 10 other accounts in your photos. Unfortunately, if you pre-schedule content in Hootsuite, it doesn't allow you to have that pre-tagging usability. So
it does actually. They're working on that. Yeah, our team works. We have a call with them every week, and we get any any complaints that anyone has, and can talk to them about it. So they really are very receptive to us because we're one of their largest government.
So they currently have that usability? Because I have tried and I don't know how. So afterwards, if you and I can talk, I would love to know how to do that, because right now I can't.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any other questions about analytics?
If you have any other questions afterward, you can please email iipsms@state.gov, and we'll be happy to help.
And Rebecca did put out a really great note about, we will try, with the permission of the speakers, we will try to have all of the presentations available on the PDC website. So please look forward to a wrap-up email from us that will have a link to the video that we're currently recording, as well as the presentations. And there will be, Alma is taking notes, so there will also be some notes for you to review if you like. And now we're going to move on to Ambassador Carlson, who is our photography expert, so the perfect subject to not have a working screen. So
we're probably better off not to have a working screen, because I stupidly did not put it into a PowerPoint. And for somebody who spent 4.5 years at the Pentagon, you know, I should have. I'll tell you, over at the Pentagon, when they start to draft something, they open up PowerPoint, just like you open up Word. Anyway, and I'm also particularly embarrassed to be here this morning. After all, I guess we have the president-elect who gets up at 3 a.m. and starts tweeting. And probably all of you know a lot more about social media than I do anyway. But I thought I was asked if I would say a few words about photography and using photographs. I've always thought that the beauty of photographs is that if you're like me and you can't hardly draw a straight line, much less anything in the way of graphic arts, that photography is a great solution. If you can mix text and photography, you can probably get your message across. And I just thought I would suggest a few rules, a few ideas to think about as you're looking at photographs and how to use them. What makes a good, attractive, and an interesting photograph. I think if you only go away from here with one rule about photography and photographs, it is that the art of photography is getting rid of stuff. Too many times we step back and we take a picture of this entire room, and when we look at it afterwards, we realize that's not very interesting. Whereas had we walked 3 steps forward and taken a picture of any one of you or any 2 of you, listening or doing whatever, sleeping, writing notes, it would be a much more interesting photograph of a meeting. And it's so often the case. Get closer. Get closer. If you look at what you see in advertising photography, in magazines and so forth, it's, just think of how they pose people and so forth. Pretty rare that anybody wants to see your shoes all the way to your hat or whatever, the top of your head. Most times what you want is something that maybe even cuts off the top of the head. You want the eyes. The eyes are super important in photography. So first rule is, get rid of a lot of stuff and move in. Get tighter, get closer. There is also a generally understood and appreciated rule of thirds, as it's said, and it basically means take like a what do I want to say, tic-tac-toe lines, the thing, and put them on the frame of your picture. In fact, this is not a bad one right here. If we walk up here, here's an image. Now, what are the things they want you to focus on? I assume that the 2 principal objects that are being drawn to your attention are the woman here, her face, and the ship, which probably represents that shipping line. Notice that neither one of them is in the center of the frame. They are, if you had those crosshatch lines here, the ship is up in the upper right-hand third, and she's over in the third of sort of the vertical third. And that's the kind of thing you're usually looking for. Look how many times, I noticed it when we were doing the social media pages that you were just showing, that there were several perfect examples there of the way your layout goes. And you're putting the person or the object or the seal of the United States or whatever in 1/3, maybe a corner third, and then something else that you're drawing attention to down in the other. You need to think of that. And there is another thing called the golden rule, and it is basically, if you think of the shape, this is where the images would help, but if you think of like a seashell that curves and so forth, basically we tend to look for that ratio that works out to be 1.618 to 1. And it is a ever-increasing spiral that goes in or out. And if you focus your main image, you can probably explain this better than I can, but if you put your main image in that circle and then bring the rest of the shot out, you'll see it. So if you think of a bullfighter flashing a cape or whatever, it's going to almost certainly be in that ratio. And any of these points, I would suggest go to Google, put photography, rule of thirds, or golden rule, the rule of thirds, or closer, and you will get many examples of exactly what I'm talking about. It's all there, and it's all free, it's all open, and you'll probably see the same photographs I picked up for the show. So, let me stop at that point and see if there are any questions. Oh, I would just bring one other thought since we talked a lot about Twitter. In my post-State Department life, I work for a little company that does international audience research, usually in places where none of you want to go as a tourist, and probably you don't even want to be assigned. And one of the things that we counsel our clients about with Twitter or any social media is it is not so much what you say, it's what they're saying. Use it as an opportunity to walk up to a cocktail party and stand around the edge and listen. Because that's where you find out what people are saying. So if you're at an embassy and you've got an issue, or your ambassador is in the news, or whatever, you want to know what people are saying about it? Watch the social media. Don't say anything, at least not initially. Just listen. It's a wonderful listening tool that we haven't only had since the advent of social media, but it does enable you to hear what people are saying about the subjects that you're interested in. So with that, I'll stop. Any questions? Please.
If you had to take 3 pictures of this presentation right now, what would you take?
I'd probably walk down and take one with a long vertical line in it, something like that. I mean, we're not being terribly active. This is a hard thing
This is like our job.
to make something up. Yeah, right. I've always thought there used to be an expression in Spanish. I think it came out of Cuba, al paralón. It's up against the wall, with a few other words. But anyway, it's, you know, everybody stands, you know, like that. That is the boring picture. That's the one you don't want. Get them to do anything else. If you have to, throw something at them, whatever, but make people move, make them look at each other, keep shooting after they think the photo is over, before it starts, anything like that to get some action into your photograph, because action is what we're looking for. And action photos tend to tell the story. And think of all the ones that you've seen, you know, that we think of as great photographs. I was even thinking the other day of the one of the young woman in Afghanistan who, in 1985, it was the picture in National Geographic, the girl with the green eyes, just sitting there. But boy, does it tell a story. And, so it can be done with just a portrait. But generally speaking, we're looking for something where somebody's moving. We have one on the Public Diplomacy website, because we're running a contest at the moment, an exhibit that we're trying to put together on images of public diplomacy. And we're seeking people to submit images of what they think of as public diplomacy. And as you can imagine, that's an abstract topic, so what the images will be can be very varied. But the one that we used to illustrate it was one of President Obama looking at a map of the world. And,
Not a handshake photo?
no, surprisingly enough, we did not put in the handshake photo. So, yeah, please.
I guess I have less a question and just more a comment.
Yeah.
So my last position overseas, I was an IO, and you know, inevitably, like my colleagues, you know, would have events going on all over the place, and inevitably, you know, we could not send a photographer or even PD staff to all these tremendous events that were taking place. So I'd ask people, you know, can you take photos of it? And people inevitably always say, you know, one of 2 things. 1, I don't have a camera, and 2, I'm not a good photographer. And the 2 things. And that was the first thing. I always held up my work BlackBerry and was like, this is a camera. This can take photos. They're not great. Maybe they're not great. Maybe they're not DSLR. They're better now than they were. But this is a camera. And then secondly, I just told people, I gave them the types of tips you were mentioning also, but otherwise I told people that a device like this can hold dozens, if not hundreds of photos. Just take as many wacky action photos as you want, send them all to us, and we will sort them out and find the good ones.
I think you're quite right. And in fact, these cameras have gotten to this point, you know, now where the quality is so good, and actually you have professional photographers competing to take pictures with iPhones and you know, telephones. And remember that the pictures that they take, if you're taking pictures that are, say, 12 megapixels, which is I think what an iPhone does nowadays, that's incredible. You know, you can blow up a 12 megapixel picture to the size of that wall down there, and it'll look fine. So if you want to zero in and pick somebody's face out, you won't have any trouble putting that on a little teeny computer screen. It's going to be perfectly, you know, it won't pixelate or anything like that. You can go crazy with Photoshop or Lightroom or something, you know, cutting out just the parts you want. if you don't have anything else, tell people to shoot movies, shoot video. Because you can clip the video into a single frame and use it as a picture. And 9 times out of 10, somewhere in the video, there's something interesting. Because usually people read it. Please.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about lighting, because one of the things, especially if you're talking about using a cell phone, that people run into is not having the right lighting or the room in the room, or knowing how to use the flash so that they get a photo that is flattering to people and captures what you're trying to capture in a room.
My advice would be to never use the flash, if you can possibly help it. Because the flash just washes everything out and it makes the contrast way too high and so forth. And as a photographer, what I try to do is to never use flash. If I have to use flash, I have one that I bounce off the ceiling or something. If you can't do that, at least take a napkin or some lightweight sheet of paper and put it over the flash so that it's not so harsh. The camera will compensate. The camera goes out, looks at the lit up picture, and then judges how much it needs to stay open. So you can dim the flash any number of ways that you might think of, including bouncing it up to the ceiling or something like that. Generally speaking, of course, keep the light behind you as the photographer, or at least off to sort of the side or an angle. Never take photographs at noontime. All the great photographs are taken somewhere between dawn and dawn plus 10 minutes and dusk and 10 minutes before dusk. Literally, that's why photographers actually get the money they get. It's because they get up so damn early. So, because they don't look good at noontime. It's just, if you are taking pictures at noontime, see if you can figure out some way to get people into the shade. At least so they're not out in the bright sunshine. But it almost never works too. If you do have to take a picture where the light's behind the subject, then turn on the flash, because it will probably just even things out and then they will fine. But you've probably experienced all this. Please.
Could you talk a little bit about editing tools, and in those cases where we don't have a great composition or the perfect photo, what editing tools we may be able to use to come up with a more intriguing or aesthetically pleasing photograph?
Yeah, I think personally on most photographs I use either Picasa, which is a Google free product, or Lightroom, which does have a cost, but it comes from Adobe and it can be pretty reasonable. It depends on how fancy you want to get with that. The main editing tool I think that you need is the crop tool, the one that allows you to cut out stuff, because as I said at the beginning, it's all about getting rid of stuff. And most of us, most of the time, we take too many, there's too much in the picture when we start, and we realize that it gets better and better as you keep eliminating things and cutting it down, and maybe rebalancing where the center of interest is. I mean, is your subject a little off to one side or something? I mean, people should be looking into the photograph, not out of it, if you can do that, if you follow what I mean. And so that, I mean, for example, the lady there is on the left and her face and her body are sort of leaning into the right side of the picture. I mean, it looks strange if she were on the right side of that picture in exactly that same position. So, but I think that crop tool is the best thing you can use, and that actually is available in a lot of computer programs and so forth for editing. I think that's the main thing to do. The other possibly is look for a tool that may be called, let's see, what's it called? Oh, it's basically, it increases the shadows and the contrast. And a lot of times our photos are taken way too bright, and we want to darken it down. We particularly want the darker stuff to get a little bit darker, and that contrast between them. So, but there is an issue always of making sure that however you're going to use it, that it looks good in that format. If you're publishing in a book, you may need brighter photographs because they tend to go darker in the books, whereas on a computer they get brighter. So sometimes it's a matter of testing it to see how it's going to look if you're worried about being too dark or too light. But I think the crop tool is the main thing to use. And if you want to go to a little bit of shadowing and so forth, that's not a bad thing. Or contrast, adding contrast. Lightroom has something called dehaze. It's way down in the bottom of all the options, but basically it's amazing. It just makes the haze go out of the air. It does it basically, I think, through increasing contrast. Anything else?
Are there any other questions for Ambassador Carson? Yes.
Hi. Hold on one second. Sorry, it's so awkward. This isn't actually a question for Brian. It's more a generalized question to really all of you, and especially you who use social media a lot. Caitlin alluded to some of the issues about actually using it in the department. And so I'm not talking now about the content and how we put it together, but what are the challenges that people face in terms of bosses that really have no idea what you're doing or what impact you're having and how you convince them that it's worth doing, or conversely, bosses that think, oh, well, we need to do this social media thing, so you have to spend all this time on it, and they sort of force you into things that you know are not really the things that you ought to be spending time on. So maybe some of the experts can talk a minute about some of that. Any tips on how to deal with those situations?
It's like my life. Because I'm in consular affairs, so it's just not on people's minds, it's not their focus. One thing that's happened is people see us as just like a glorified website. So anything that happens, they're like, oh, the assistant secretary was here, can you put a picture up? And I'm just like, no. Like, sorry, that's boring. But my answer is not sorry, that's boring. That's just my head. I actually created a strategy. It's not very long. It's like 3 pages that kind of defines what our site is, like the audiences we're trying to reach, the content that does that, you know, kind of like our own branding statement, like what TravelGov is, and we're really just like informational, and that really lets us be like, thanks that passport agency, but we don't want your like World Water Day group photo where you all were blue. Like we're not putting that up. But I mean, ultimately, like I'm low level, like a third tour officer, so it is hard telling some DAS who comes in and is like, let's put this, you know, up, to be like, no. So having a strategy that's already been approved ahead of time, then you can just be like, well, pivot to, these are the things we're trying to do with this page, like we're looking for this type of content, if you have it, but clarifying that ahead of time so that you don't have to battle when people want to put up things that you know are not helpful for your audience, because as you all probably know, on Facebook especially, you put up stuff that people don't like, and eventually Facebook's going to assume you're a boring page, and it's going to start hiding you from your own followers, so we don't want that to happen, and we want to be able to reach the people that we're reaching, and bad content can have that effect. So like a strategy is something that helps me with that. And also just constantly explaining, like it does take, honestly, just like a strong personality. I'm pretty sure I just feel like the most annoying person at this point, but I constantly have to sit in meetings and just explain like, hey, you know, a crisis happened, it's not enough for us just to send out a travel message to the couple of people who still register for STEP when they travel overseas. Like, we have this tool, this is how we can use it, you know, and to make this, but I have to keep pounding away at it and having conversations over and over that are repetitive. And so there's not always an easy answer other than just, you might have to sit in what feels like the 10th meeting saying like the same thing, but you just have to do that.
I think also regularly reporting on what you're doing and what works well for your audience on social media is important for everyone to see. So not just like giving numbers and saying, oh, this worked, but like showing this picture really worked for our audience, we engaged, it brought home this policy message, and regularly demonstrating what works, and maybe even developing some sort of do's and don'ts for contributing social media to, or social media content.
So in Lahore, my last post, we had really successful social media outreach, and that was in large part because I had an amazing social media specialist in LES who really knew what he was doing. But we also were able to convince our principal officer to be engaged in social media, and he was a self-confessed Luddite when he started a post. But some of the things that they were talking about, I think, are really important. Reporting to your principal officer about the success of your social media and showing him, in a post that got, 300,000 reach or was then featured on our report because it was such a successful post, gets a little bit into the ego of your principal officer, and then this is real, then he wants to be on social media more, and he will then make opportunities to find ways for him to be in good photos for social media. And that's exactly what happened with our principal officer in Lahore. And that made our social media impact on Facebook all that much better because people loved him in Lahore. So definitely, and so then we started, and every week I put out a sort of like, this is what we're doing in PD report. And at the top, I had all of our social media stats. And he looked at it every week, like a hawk. He was wanting to know where he was on social media and how many people in Lahore saw him that week. And then also just sort of explaining how it works, I think is really important because not everybody understands why we do the sort of soft posts, and then how that creates a better, like what she was just talking about, if your page is boring, it becomes irrelevant. And so sometimes you gotta balance the policy posts with stuff that is particularly good for your local audience. So like in Lahore we found Sufism plus social media was like the key. That was gold. So anytime my consul general went to a Sufi shrine and we took photos and put it up at the right time on Facebook, we automatically had 2,000 comments on that post. And I'm not exaggerating, we literally would have 2,000 comments. Almost all of them positive. That gets your page relevant. So then when you do post something about something that Ambassador Hale says on policy, it's still in that feed. And so explaining that to people who don't understand Facebook and why you need to put a picture of your principal, in a Sufi shrine or other kinds of cultural stuff that he may not think is really important because he's a political officer and he's like, that's not policy. You got to sort of explain the whole picture. And I think that once your principals understand that, they kind of get the whole idea of what you're trying to achieve. At least that was my experience in my last 2 posts.
When you got so many comments, did you have the time? Did you comment back? How did you engage, and how many people did you have working on it with such a big volume?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we knew that when we would post that post that it would be a bomb. Like we knew that. And so and we knew when to post it exactly. And my social media specialist was on it, liking and responding to all of the comments, because if you like she was saying at the beginning, if you comment on a comment, or you like the comments that come on, as soon as they come up, that keeps your post up the scale. There's nothing you can do more than that will help your posts. If you put it up there and leave it alone, you are killing it. You're wasting an opportunity. And it's all about timing. We found in Lahore. We found that people in Lahore were on Facebook between 8 and 10 p.m. So I worked out with my social media specialist that he had flexible hours. So he worked every night from 8 to 10. He was willing to do that, and that was why our page was so successful. When he quit and we had somebody who was not willing to do it, our page tanked. I mean, immediately, overnight. Because we just needed that time. So that is the most important thing you can do, is engage with your engagement. Thank you, the people who are making your page relevant, really. But yeah, you have to be prepared for it. You have to know, like, that you're going to put this really great post out, but be prepared to spend time with it.
I'm also interested in how many people around the table have had trouble with the whole clearance issue that Caitlin brought up. She's in a lucky position where people just let her do it.
Lucky and unlucky.
Yeah, but you've had trouble?
Both ways, though.
Oh, wait. Sorry.
I was the PD desk officer for Ukraine when things started getting kind of hairy over there, and there was a lot of pressure from within the department to do tons of social media engagement on an incredibly fast-moving target where the NSC and the department there were a lot of complexities, and frankly, I think we we should have stuck to more traditional media engagement and reference that if I'd had my say, but in the end, people would complain about, the clearances are slowing things down, but policy does change fast, and wording matters, and sometimes I'm here actually to defend, you know, having to be like the nexus between the policy desk and the PD side. There are times that there are certain things that just, I'm not saying it can't be done, but you gotta pick your messages and understand that when a topic gets really weedy, you know, weeds don't work well on social media unless it's a live engagement, something like a live chat or something with a principal who's authorized to speak on the record. I don't think that policy people are comfortable with social media. I agree, and I'm not saying that there's a perfect that somehow the people who were asking for clearances were always right, and the social media practitioners were always a little too overeager. But I do think that when it's a fast-moving target, you've got to be careful. And I know there's crisis response, and that's another set of issues. But at the end of the day.
Sorry. Actually, if you guys want to pass that one down, and we'll keep this on this side. I'm trying to keep it moving.
So I just want to add, I think in emergent situations, it's kind of a different, where the policy is changing minute to minute. But in our more kind of workaday engagements, I know in our bureau we've had a lot of success working with our front office to define the terms in advance. You know, what kinds of engagements are they okay with us doing without clearance? Or what do they want working level clearance? What do they want a DAS clearance? And sort of everybody knowing those things ahead of time. You know, what the consular colleague was talking about, Caitlin was talking about in terms of answering questions, this is fact. This is not making policy. This is not even talking about policy as much as it is answering a factual question and maybe even directing someone to the information that is already out there. We had a brief period in my bureau where for various reasons, we were directing people to quotes that were already on our website. And they still found it incredibly helpful because people don't know how to navigate our website, because our website is not really well designed. And so if we could send them a quote that was from our own website, then there's no clearance involved, it's already on the website. And I think sometimes it's just getting your principals comfortable with you being empowered to engage in such a way that it's not going to be on the front page of the Washington Post the next day.
Can I just add something? It occurs to me. I think we need to always remember, particularly for embassy, that one of our important roles is to be the source of the facts. And a lot of people come to us not because we're cute and interesting, but because we've actually got exactly what the President said, and you can read the entire text no matter how boring it is. You know, so I think especially in a crisis situation, you probably want to hew more to the safety of putting up fact sheets or texts and speeches and stuff where you're sure you're absolutely giving them what they need to see.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, that's what we have press guidance and everything for. I certainly use press guidance a lot on social media, and I just don't even tell anybody I'm doing it. I have a Trump question waiting for me right now that I saw right before I left, because a lot of people have, like, how will this affect visas? And I know my press colleagues have been working on it, so I'll just put it up there and not even ask anybody about it, because there's guidance for it. And I do think that there are some situations, you know, that are more careful, or you might need to talk to the subject matter expert. I certainly send tweets to people a lot just to be like, what's the answer to this? Or what should we say back to this policy question? But I agree with you, and I don't know your name, but that there is a lot of guidance already out there on our pages that people can draw from. And I think it's something that, as a profession, a public affairs specialist, we have to be moving forward and changing the viewpoint of who's actually working on social media. I definitely have been trying to convince all my bosses that it is a press officer position. I'm trying to get training right now for how to do crisis communications. Some of my bosses are like, well, there's a social media course. And I'm like, no, they need to take press officer training and the social media course, and probably know about consular too. I mean, it needs that press officer judgment in the time And in a lot of embassies, you have maybe your lowest level local staff person working on it, and yeah, they're not empowered to just pop on and start talking policy, but instead of just saying, let's not engage, we have to really take a look as public affairs specialists and be like, so what do we need to do to get there so we can be talking about these things? You know, if that's a better collaboration with the political section, if that's the actual press officer making time for that, I think that we have to be building it in, because I don't think the answer is just not to engage.
Okay, I'd like to flag the time for anyone who may need to go back. Is there any other questions before we wrap this all up? All right, well, thank you so much for coming, everyone. Please, thank you very much, Caitlin, Rebecca, Jody, and Ambassador Carson for your time. If you haven't already done so, please do sign in at our sign-in sheet before you head out. It looks like we still have some sandwiches left, so please feel free to help yourself. And at the end, we will send a wrap-up email with all of this information, in addition to the presentations that we weren't able to show you today. Thank you.